Yeah, so it's really interesting to me how in U.S. history, over and over again, even when scientific information changes, it is still easier to target marginalized populations as the fault of public health issues because that is cheaper and faster than killing ground squirrels for 20 years.
Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm Jessica Wilson, dietitian and author of It's Always Been Ours. Making It Awkward is an independent podcast brought to you by people who believe in funding governmental organizations that track disease outbreaks. You can support this podcast by rating, reviewing, subscribing, and joining the Patreon. You can email the show at makingitawkwardpod@gmail.com, and leaving a comment or review will bring my dad back to the show. Later, we'll hear from medical historian Dr. Bethany Johnson, who returns to the show to talk about the history of the plague in the U.S., rats, squirrels, and how government agencies should function to protect us. First, a couple of quick updates. Dr. Casey Means, co-founder of the CGM company Levels, did not have her first Senate hearing on October 30th as planned. News outlets reported that she had gone into labor and simply couldn't make it, though somehow ABC News obtained her prepared confirmation testimony prior to the hearing, which reportedly said that she would, quote, put Americans back on the road toward wholeness and health. Another fun Means siblings update is that Casey's brother, Callie Means, is no longer a special government employee, even though as of last week, multiple sites listed him as such. According to the New York Times, Mr. Means was limited to a 130-day term. Democratic members of Congress have said the term should have ended around late July, but Mr. Means said that he had taken time off earlier in the year and ended up leaving the White House about a month ago when his term ran out. Callie Means may be out of the White House, but definitely not done with public life. He's the top billed cast member in an upcoming documentary, Breaking Big Food, and I look forward to seeing his credentials listed there. The documentary comes to Apple TV and Prime on, questionably, Thanksgiving. It apparently features modern-day Davids taking on big food. And it also is directed by someone whose only other feature is breaking pickleball. Oh, well. So, TBD on that one. I'll do an episode on it only if it makes us laugh and not cry. All right. Dr. Bethany Johnson was first introduced to all of you in the interview about Maha moms and measles. Today, she's back to talk about another of her passions, the plague. We get into a lot. She talks about the impact of how anti-Asian and anti-Latino sentiment in California contributed to the spread of the plague during two different outbreaks. We start the episode with a discussion of a conference presentation she gave about plague outbreak timelines in the U.S. The presentation offers some wild images, including men raking through a wood pile, cleaning out debris, assumably of the plague. A photo of men in white outfits looking over dead rats in the plague eradication lab in San Francisco between 1904 and 1906. There's also a photo of a house that was the epicenter of the plague outbreak in Los Angeles, a house with multiple additional dwellings in the back and trash out on the curb. And there's also a wild photo of a supposed hygienic lab in LA where there's a huge pile of dead rats nailed to boards. It's a wide-ranging and very interesting timeline. Bethany also talks about climate change, antibiotic resistance, Lyme disease, pet safety mitigation measures, and what the defunding of government organizations will mean for us. She also has advice for those of us and our dads out there with wood piles in our backyard. Dr. Bethany Johnson, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
I saw a plague case on social media, specifically close to me over in Tahoe, and I sent it to you immediately because I was clearly then going to get the plague either here or if I went to Tahoe. So I said, what is my risk? Am I going to die? I need to know these things. And because you mentioned plague, the last episode you were on, I contacted you for my health anxiety. So thanks for coming back on the show.
Well, so two things. I don't believe you will get the plague. However, I do think it's important to talk about whether or not we're monitoring the plague right now.
Okay.
What the potential chances are for plague in the future, and also that there are ways that you can notice in your area.
Okay.
If there might be plague in the local animal population, and then what you do to protect you and your sweet dog.
Could we do a history lesson 100 years or 110 years ago? Because the pictures in your presentation of like the full culling of and like collecting of squirrels and things was very compelling. I would love a history lesson there.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's disagreement over if it was the third or the end of the second pandemic, but the third pandemic started in China in the 1890s. It doesn't always start in China. This one happened to, I know who was on the HHS and what they had to say about the particular name for the COVID virus. Anyway, we believe that ship with infected rats docked in San Francisco anytime between 1896 and 1900, it would have been in that range. And in early 1900, the first case of bubonic plague was found in San Francisco. Now, they didn't agree on whether or not it was. The science wasn't clear on whether or not it came from rats for sure, whether it was a sanitation issue. The rat-flea relationship was really confirmed by 1908, which is going to be the second outbreak in San Francisco. But the first outbreak, it happens mostly in Chinatown because there are people going in and out by ship, and there are boarding houses, and this is a tight living quarters. Also, something I'm going to argue in an article later, a very rapid market for ground squirrel meat. And I'll tell you, San Franciscans loved ground squirrel. People of all classes, they sold them as frog legs in fancy restaurants.
Fascinating.
But it was little ground squirrels. People said it was delicious. It was a delicacy. They actually had to make it illegal to ship ground squirrels into San Francisco because of the plague issue around 1908, because they were sending 500 and 700 tons at a time by train.
So when I tell you, I guess not.
No. And I'm like, y'all are surrounded by ground squirrel country. But no, there was that market ran at a clip. And so I'm not surprised that it started there, because that's also where a lot of the ground squirrel market was. And the mayor and the governor and people were not okay at all with admitting that there was plague. And they refused to do so until an agent of the federal government's U.S. Marine Hospital Service, which is U.S. Public Health Service, which the CDC grew out of later. His name is Dr. Rupert Blue. And he came and he was like, if you don't want a port quarantine and your economy shut down, we're going to do something about this. And they were like, okay. And so they worked on it 1903 to 1904. Over 100 people died, mostly Chinese immigrants. And then they were like, okay, everything's fine. We shut down Chinatown. We took away everybody's rights. They sued us. We kind of lost that. But it was just Chinese people that died.
Sure.
I mean, the things that people were saying were what you would expect from the time period. One of the state officials said that Chinese people were more likely to get plague because they had glandular issues.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like all Chinese people. Thank you, sir, for your thoughts. And so Dr. Blue went home, and then the huge San Francisco earthquake happens.
Fascinating.
And then the city catches on fire. Chinatown was fine, did not catch on fire, and had been rebuilt out of cement during that point. So it did a lot better than the wooden houses all over the city. While people were living in tent communities, refugees were in little cottages. The city, the sewers were open, garbage was everywhere. So rats came back in full force. It became just a rat paradise. And even people in San Francisco were like, there's a lot of rats, guys. This isn't great. And so then what they realized is that, plague is back. And it was back in 1907. And there were no cases in Chinatown because they had built the rats out of Chinatown in 1903, 1904. So this was Italian immigrants, people, mostly working class people, but they were white. They were considered white. And still, they did not really want to do a whole lot about it because they thought it would be too expensive and they needed to rebuild the city. And Dr. Rupert Blue came back and said, once again, would you like a port quarantine and no business while you're trying to rebuild? Or would you like to partner together and rebuild your destroyed city so that rats don't want to live here?
Mm-hmm.
And they actually worked with women's clubs and church groups and a lot of just regular San Francisco citizens. And they caught rats, and the federal government paid people for rats.
Yeah.
You got the most money for a pregnant one because they were like, yes, let's stop the next generation of rats. It was like 50 cents, like a ton of money at the time for a rat. And then, they would put them in cans and bring them to rat testing sites. And then they would nail them to the boards and test them and see. And they killed over 1 million rats over the next year that way. And they rebuilt the wharf. They made cement sidewalks, and they were able to get ahead of the plague cases. And they were done fighting it by about 1909. But federal officials already knew that it was in Oakland because doctors there were like, hey, so there's something really weird happening out here with the ground squirrels. And they seem to be like dying with these big lumps on them. And so from 1903 on, they were testing ground squirrels from Oakland. And they think that it got across the bay pretty easily, not just because of rats on ships, but because rats and ground squirrels like to live in the same warrens together. They'll just like, cool, we can be friends. Let's cohabitate. Thank you for this dwelling. And so they share fleas as well. Yeah. And so people in Oakland started to get plague. And then in 1908, a kid in Los Angeles was playing near the train tracks, as you did. And a kid in 1908 got bitten on the finger by a ground squirrel and was very sick 5 days later.
Okay.
So how was it in the ground squirrels in Los Angeles already? Probably because they were shipping ground squirrels around the state, and the ground squirrels were getting it from the rats in San Francisco, and they were going to train stations all over the state. So it was in Los Angeles, basically from the second wave. And Los Angeles was like, that sounds like a San Francisco problem to me. And Oakland was like, you know what? We're not really going to spend any money on this. And then the public health officials were like, yeah, but I feel like more people in Oakland are going to die. And the Oakland officials were like, what's in it for you, Mr. Funny Man? And the guy was like, okay, I am not a politician. Like, I'm not dealing with this. And went back to his little lab in Berkeley and just tested stuff, but stopped talking to the municipal people. And they had a big outbreak in Oakland in 1919.
Yes. Lasted till what? 2021?
And they thought it was influenza because the 1918 influenza. That's how I got there, because that's what I study. And I read a California report about the flu, and it's just this offhand comment. This doctor was like, yeah, we thought that was the flu, but it was, what a mess. It was pneumonic plague. And I was like, wow. Because it's really deadly because people tend to think it's flu. Now they would potentially think it's COVID because you will feel really tired. Maybe have a sore throat, maybe have a little trouble breathing, feel muscle weakness. And the problem with pneumonic plague is if you don't get it real fast, the death rate is like almost 100%. But if you get it real fast and you give someone antibiotics, they can survive. It's just you have to know what it is. And they did not know. And so 14 people in Oakland got it. They put them in isolation in the hospital. 13 died, but they were able to keep it from spreading by putting folks in isolation in the hospital. Yeah. In 1924, it started killing things off just outside of the city. And some rats got it. And someone killed a rat from under their house, and they ended up with plague. And then their daughter got it, and it spread from there. And that also became a pneumonic outbreak, and that killed 30 people. But similar to San Francisco, it was predominantly in a neighborhood that Mexican migrants lived in. And that was because, I'm sure you know this history, migrants and immigrants were only allowed to live in certain places. They were only rented to in certain places. The Mexican community in the early 1920s in Los Angeles was renting areas like right at the bottom of kind of where the canyons ended to the east of the city and sort of right at the edge of what the city was at the time. And so they were closest to the ground squirrel population and the train tracks where that little boy had gotten it. And so they did what they did in the 1918 influenza outbreak. They blamed the Mexican community for the outbreak as if being a Mexican made you more open to the plague. And then they used police to shut down and quarantine the whole neighborhood for 12 days. And they put public health nurses in there. They didn't let anyone go in or out. There were people that didn't live in the neighborhood that were caught there when the police got there, and they had to sleep in a local church for 12 days.
Wow.
And they also put people in isolation. And you probably saw the picture of the nurses that look like they're wearing space gear, but that was PPE at the time.
Back then. I was curious about, you had mentioned the Clare Street Bayside. Yep. Okay, where are we with that? Where in the timeline is that?
That's Los Angeles. That is that community, the Clare Street community in Los Angeles. And that is where the plague blew up. And that was within the area that had been quarantined. That was the remediation stage. Again, Los Angeles did not want to deal with this because it was a quote unquote Mexican problem. Mexican people were quote unquote dirty. This was their fault. Even though in 1924, everybody knew it was a rodent and flea issue. Everybody. That's why the nurses were wearing PPE, because they didn't want to get fleas on them. Everybody was very clear about this. But they were like, you know what? This is America. Let's go with racism instead, and we can save some money. And then they refused to spend any money. And then they were put under a federal quarantine at their port. And the business people didn't like that. So they ended up having to spend $2 million remediating these neighborhoods because most of these properties were owned by landlords that didn't take care of the properties and charged whatever they wanted, right? And so they let people build lean-tos in the backyard. Understandable if you are a migrant worker and you don't have any money. There were wood piles everywhere, brush piles everywhere. It was a rat paradise. And so that is a picture of them taking off the bottom siding of the house to put cement in because rats don't like that. They're like, well, I can't burrow in here and eat things. I don't like this. So they poured a lot of cement, just like they did in San Francisco.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And then you also have this delightful rats nailed to boards ready for skinning photo.
This is the part where I'm like, I love to tell the story. I'm so glad I will never do that. And that is not my job. I do not want to skin a rat and test it for plague. I really trust those guys to do it. Good for them.
So they were shipped to this laboratory, nailed.
Yeah, and it was within the city. They were packed in metal canisters and trucked to the laboratory. And then these guys would, with real rubber that we still got from trees at the time, would take them out and nail them to the board and then do the autopsy, look for buboes, and then get bacterial samples and then put them on a slide and show whether or not they were plague. And they were also taking, it's not a vaccine, but it is a medicine people took to prevent getting an infection, but it had really horrible side effects, and they had to take it every day to work with these rats. But they weren't getting plague from them, so that's good.
Okay. So one solution, cement. That makes sense. Okay. I'm looking at the photos here again. Oh, and then you have a slide. This is the most serious matter, the missing ground squirrel.
So now when I'm looking back, it's very clear to me that rats weren't really the problem in California. It was the ground squirrel and how they have warrens top to bottom through the state. And they have miles and miles of interconnected burrows. And that means that on ranches or just outside of San Francisco, there are some counties that don't actually they haven't been able to find bacteria in the soil or animals in 20 years, but you can still look up. California still runs a map of where they have found plague in the last 10 years and animals that they've tested. So one of the reasons it's not great that we left the WHO, I mean, let's count the ways that's not great. But the WHO worked with the National Wildlife Disease Program of the US. And between 2005 and 2016, the National Wildlife Disease Program collected 45,000 blood samples from wildlife across the Western United States to test it for plague. And there was some shared funding there, but don't worry, we don't need that funding anymore, Jessica. It's fine. We're good.
It's fine.
It's fine.
Yeah.
There's nothing to see here. So, but again, we're talking about 1 case a year, 2 cases a year. The average death rate in the US from plague is 7 cases. And I also saw this on social media. That's really where it exploded. I didn't find as much of it on sort of Al Gore's general internet, but I did see it on social media, and people were worried about it because they heard about a case. Then they heard that a guy died of pneumonic plague. And so that's the one that you die real fast. So probably by the time he got to the hospital, there wasn't a whole lot that they could do. And then there's septicemic plague, which overwhelms your system because it gets in your blood. It's all the same. You'll read in the media that there are different types of plague. There are not different types of plague. Plague is caused by Yersinia pestis bacteria, which is held in a wide range of animals, rodents, carnivores, other mammals. There are 200 flea species in the US that can carry plague, but they have to be able to get an animal that's infected, and they have to be able to carry it long enough for the animal to die and then for them to jump onto you, which is what happened in 2 of these cases. People were camping and they were bitten by an infected flea. So that's the sort of route of transmission.
So, like, where is the plague right now?
Okay, great question.
Where does it stick so that a flea could get it, so that an animal or I could get it? Help me out.
So again, I want to say that this is going to sound bad, but it's less bad than it is, and I'll explain why. The plague bacteria is endemic in the entire Western United States from the coast of California to the Mississippi River. It's in hundreds of species, predominantly
animals or like dirt.
Animals. It can also live in dirt for 400 days at a time, just the bacteria. I know this sounds really bad, right? But it's actually hard for it to get to humans because it's not a human disease. This is an animal disease. It is an accident when humans get the plague. It is a mistake. And in fact, humans aren't great hosts for plague because they die quickly if people don't identify it. But if people know that it's a plague, super easy. You just get yourself some tetracycline and that'll get you all fixed up. Really, as soon as we had antibiotics, it became a much less scary thing. But animals all around you in California could potentially have it. Now, let's say you're in your yard. You're taking your dog outside to go to the bathroom. You see a little ground squirrel, a chipmunk, some little rodent, and it looks drunk. Like it is not walking straight, stumbling around. Take your dog and go in the house. Go inside. And then make sure you don't have brush piles or wood piles or the compost very close to your house because that attracts rodents. And if they happen to have plague, which endemically they do throughout the Western United States, it just can blossom in the population. A bunch of animals can die off. And then once that die-off happens, fleas are looking for another host because they got to stay alive. So if you happen to be in the area after their original host died off, that's how they get onto humans. And previously, if people are at national parks, for example, the Grand Canyon often has plague outbreaks in their rodents. So they will tell you on a tour what is the most dangerous animal in the park, and then they'll tell you it's a squirrel. And that's because it has plague. And if your pet is off leash and gets too close, because why is this rodent acting so weird and tippy and drunk? Your dog's going to be like, and want to get in there, and the flea can jump to your dog, and then your dog can get the plague. And if they sleep in your bed and they have the flea on them, you can get the plague. Dog and cat to human transmission has historically over the last 30, 40 years been a way that people got the plague, especially cats. They often end up getting the pneumonic version because of how their face is shaped. And They get a cough and they cough on their owner, and then their owner gets pneumonic plague.
Oh, great. Okay, good.
Yeah. But again, this is a lot of things have to happen for that. It has to have lived in the soil. It has to have infected the local animal population. They have to be in a current die-off. The fleas need to have lost their host, and your dog has to be there at that moment. So that is why so few people get the plague, but it is actually everywhere in the environment from time to time. There could be 10 years where there are no rodent die-offs. But this year, there's a rodent die-off in Colorado, and the public health department in Flagstaff, Arizona, where that guy died of pneumonic plague, they were like, this is not related to the prairie dog die-off, just so everyone knows. They like made that as part of their public statement. I was like, can you clarify for people at all what you might be talking about there? I.e., we are monitoring this. We have tested the local prairie dogs. There was a die-off. They're not dying off from plague. It's something else. But they also didn't give any details about the man who died in Flagstaff. And he was the one who died of pneumonic plague. And they said, out of respect for his family at this time, we are not offering any further details. On one hand, I understand that. On the other hand, I'm like, could you have given anonymous details? Like he was skinning a ground squirrel or something? Like then... Yeah, this is how people have historically gotten it.
Fleas. So just to recap, we've got fleas. It is in the fleas. Okay.
Yeah, and scientists are still heavy into plague research. I just read a new paper out, which suggests my nerd level on plague. They, in a lab, they're trying to figure out how well human fleas, so fleas that live in and around humans and sustain themselves primarily on humans, can transmit plague, because they're trying to understand how so many people died in Europe. And if human fleas are actually good transmitters, that helps you understand why 40% of Florence died, for example. There weren't that many rats. There weren't huge rat die-offs in a lot of these outbreaks over hundreds of years in Europe. And so for a long time, people disagreed on whether or not it was actually bubonic plague, because we knew it required rodent vectors and somewhere for the fleas to be. But if it was human fleas, well, that's different. So this crew got some human fleas, and they figured out there's a type of human flea that has these glands like right by its mouth. And it can hold and grow plague bacteria and then bite you from those glands. And that's how you can get it. But again, it has to be in a certain spot. And the flea has to bite you when they have enough of this bacteria to give you an infection. It is truly an accident when humans get plague, because you need so many factors in place. It's one of the reasons why I like to study it, because it takes so many things to have happened simultaneously for it to actually get to people. There's one exception.
Great.
If someone gets pneumonic plague, human to human transmission is possible with pneumonic plague. That's why I perked up when I saw the pneumonic plague case, and they were like, we're not releasing any other details. And I was like, okay, this must have been a situation where he was either near an animal or a flea, and where he got bit overwhelmed his lymphatic system and it got into his lungs. Not that he got pneumonic plague from another person, because we absolutely would have heard about that case, because public health departments are required by law to report them.
Okay, so, can you do bubonic plague, pneumonic plague, just real quick?
Yeah. So bubonic plague is when you are bit by a flea or another human or animal ectoparasite, and it usually goes into your lymph areas first. So here, armpit, groin, and that's where the bacteria kind of bottlenecks, and that's why you get what's called a bubo. Sometimes, particularly, I've also heard of them by the collarbone. In Manchuria, marmot plague that's what carries it there, not ground squirrels. And there are a lot of stories of plague buboes by the collarbone. Depending on where it enters your bloodstream, it can make its way to your lungs, and you can develop pneumonic plague which is plague bacteria in your lungs.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, if you're in close quarters, and it's like COVID, like you have to be within 6 feet of the person because it's really droplets, not aerosol. You need like bigger droplets. If you cough, like, and they breathe it in through their mouth, it'll just go right to their lungs. And then you have a huge outbreak. So I think it was in 1911 in Manchuria, 60,000 people died. And that was a pneumonic plague outbreak. So I think those are the numbers we're used to versus one person in Flagstaff, Arizona on a camping trip. But they would have, as soon as he died, they would have done an autopsy. And then they would have been like, okay, where was this from? They would have been able to track it through the local public health department or infectious disease office in the state.
Oh, really? Those are still open. Okay, good.
Yeah, I did actually. I called the one in California because I was trying to figure out, because California got hit hard by the U.S. Forestry and Bureau of Land Management firings that have happened. Also, like some of their local CDC people, since they fired 10% of the CDC already this year. Also, the whole EPA. FDA. I just saw, 300,000 people. And I called them and I was like, hey, have you all lost your federal contacts? And the guy was like, I don't really know. Here's our media person. And I wasn't able to get a hold of her, but I went on a deep Google dive to try to figure that out. My sense is if the media person can't return phone calls, they may be a little overwhelmed.
Yes. Or uninterested or not wanting to alarm
like
anybody.
I don't want to talk. Yeah. Well, I don't want to talk about this. Yeah. And the U.S. Forestry Service in California, they were some of the frontline people. So as a epidemic historian, as someone who studies the history of health and medicine and public health, I got really nervous when not thinking there's going to be an immediate plague outbreak, but I'm thinking about over the next 20 years, how these animal populations are going to be impacted and how that's going to spill over potentially in the human population in our national park system. Because people that are keeping track of these trails, they are some of the first people that come across plague-infested rodents, and they know how to pack and send them to offices where they can be tested. They've closed down whole sectors of national parks in California and state parks because they're like, we have a plague outbreak and rodents here, so no one can come here because y'all aren't going to listen to us and you're going to bring your dogs and they're going to get plague and we're not doing that. And so they'll put up signs like, you can't, this is closed off because of plague. And those people are not really watching the trails anymore.
Goodness. I've seen wobbly squirrels, right? But I'm like, oh, did somebody put out poison and this is just what's happening here?
Which could also be happening, but
it never will in my head. No.
Right.
No, that's not what
for the rest of your life, you're going to be like, get out, go away, move away.
Right.
Yeah. I would too, because I can't tell the difference, but I know that is like a sign that they are close to death. And just in case it's plague, I want me, I want my dog, I want my cat, I want anyone within flea jumping distance, not near that.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And if you have a dad who's like, I just need to put this scrap wood, like I'm totally going to build this.
No. Oh man.
Just like have it far away from the house.
I'm going to show him this entire presentation as a reason.
Sorry to your dad.
No, don't be for him. This is a good thing for me. Okay. He needs to get his stuff together and get it out.
Adult children everywhere are like, no, you can't have that, especially within like 30 feet of your house. Yeah. Because ground squirrels love to live in those. They love it.
Dad, did you know you're about to kill me? Is how this is going to go.
But again, only
LA.
like one case in your whole state this year. But there are things people can do.
No.
Like, we're going to have tidy backyards now. That's it.
Yeah. That's what we need. Oh man, this is good. I needed hard evidence. And this is
hopefully this will be convenient for other listeners. They'll be like, I'm sorry, we have to clean this up. We can't. This is a plague risk.
Yeah. That sounds intense.
Yes.
Oh man.
Use it to tidy up, and do some flea dip for your pets.
No. Oh man, this is fascinating. Because no, I'm not going to tell him that'll solve it. Okay.
No, you would say we need to take a multi-pronged approach.
Yes. Yeah. Because he does have cats that just hang out in his backyard, and I'll tell him that they're going to die. So
yeah, cats that contract plague die about 40% of the time. So it can be, you want to do flea protection. You also want to dismantle places where rodents can live. Now, again, this is not because there is an imminent risk of plague. But what we do know is that we are not monitoring it at the level that we are before. We know that this season there was a die-off. There were 2 human cases, and there are die-offs being monitored in Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. We know that that is happening right now. So when you hear that sort of thing in the news, that's a good time to be engaging in these mitigation measures, to get real serious about anti-flea measures on your pets, to clean up the stuff in your backyard, and to... I know people have, and I am not a pet owner, so I am not claiming a stake in this argument. When I hear that there is a prairie dog die off, if I was a pet owner and I took them on hikes, I would keep them on leash.
Okay.
Because as soon as you go off the path, that's where you're like, oh, what's this little weird ground squirrel doing? He looks a little funny, sniff, sniff. And then you have a different level of risk. Again, not a high risk, but if you just didn't want to have anything to do with it, you could keep your dog on a leash when you're on hikes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to me how in U.S. history, over and over again, even when scientific information changes, it is still easier to target marginalized populations as the fault of public health issues because that is cheaper and faster than killing ground squirrels for 20 years. And American taxpayers, not really a fan of killing something for 20 years and spending millions of dollars to manage these populations and study them when only 1 or 2 people are dying of plague. But if you only want 1 or 2 people, I would like 0 people dying of plague. But if you want to keep the number at 1 or 2, you do have to engage occasionally in mitigation measures, and you have to do testing and tracking of where it is. Now, again, there haven't been these huge explosions like there were in the early 20th century. But we have a few issues to think about for the future. The first is, especially in states like Arizona, you have people building houses further and further into rural territory where these animals have been endemic hosts of pandemic for 80 years. And when you disrupt their living quarters, they need to find somewhere else to be. And sometimes that's going to be in your backyard. And so that puts humans in contact with potential, with communities of sylvatic rodents that can have these die-off events where plague blossoms, destroys most of the population, but then they have a lot of babies really quickly. They get themselves back together. So intrusion into rural areas and unsettled areas is one. Climate change is also another problem. So the bacteria have only gone to the Mississippi River. I really don't want to think about what would happen if plague bacteria jumped the Mississippi. Because, even harder to take care of than it is in the West. But just think about all that dense population. Yeah, it's like a public health official's nightmare. Not even that tons and tons of people would die, but then now you have to test and track it here forever. You're not going to get rid of it. And then what happens when you have plague showing up in squirrel populations in Baltimore? No one wants to deal with that on top of everything else. But as the climate changes, as people and animals move, you and I talked a little bit about Lyme disease earlier. Lyme disease exists in areas where it never did before. That is because of climate change. That's why we keep coming back to vectors like mosquitoes. Why is Zika in the US now? Why is West Nile virus moving? Why is Lyme disease moving? Because temperature patterns are changing and ecosystems are shifting, and different animals and insects can live in places they've never been able to survive in before.
Okay, so there's 200 species of mosquito.
I don't know. There's millions but there's 200 plus species of flea in the United States that can transmit plague to animals. We are not sure how. I think it's only 23 that can transmit it to humans, which is a decently small number if you're thinking about insects. I mean, I think there's like 400,000 plus kinds of beetles or something. So, but it's more than one. It's more than one. It's about 23 that we know of and that we have on record able to do that. And then the third risk, which shows up in other areas of public health, is antibiotic resistance. You use antimicrobials to treat plague, and antibiotics are a subset of antimicrobials, and you use those. And you can use tetracycline, like I think I mentioned earlier. So it's inexpensive and easy to treat if you know what it is. If we continue to do that, if we have more cases and we continue to have antibiotic resistance, that means we'll have to use other antimicrobials. That's another reason why we don't want it to cross the Mississippi. We don't want to give ourselves a huge expanded pool for potential cases that we then have antibiotics to treat. Especially because some of the populations in the East have antibiotic resistance because of other illnesses and because of overprescription as children. I think our generation is the one where they were like, please stop. Stop. Yes. It's not for viruses. Don't do that. MRSA is harming people in hospitals. Mm-hmm. No, you can't. Like, there's signs up at the pediatrician for my kids now, and they're like, these are times we're not going to give you an antibiotic. You can ask, but the answer is no.
Right. The sniffles, not a good time.
Right. Most of these are viruses, and you don't need antibiotics for those.
Is there anything else that mostly concerns you about mosquitoes, climate change, and migration?
Yeah, when I'm thinking about vectors like fleas and mosquitoes, because southern and the western areas in the U.S. have traditionally been the host environments for these vectors, it has been very hard to convince municipal leaders and, in many cases, governors and state legislatures to pay to take care of these problems and to study them. So there's like one clinic on the border in Texas that studies mosquitoes, what kinds of mosquitoes are around, what they're carrying, and they can't find people to hire because it is a really specific skill set. And people are not studying this, or they're leaving programs right now because we are deconstructing the entire science apparatus of the US, of which we have been the world leader for the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. And if people are not studying these things, and we are trying to limit immigration, and we are discouraging students from abroad by charging them $100,000 to study in the US, it will become harder and harder to staff these positions and to do this work internally or with external people. And when we are firing people that are monitoring animals in the environment and are sort of your first line people that notice this, I don't like that. And again, I'm not saying to the listening audience that this puts any of us in an immediate risk of plague, but it's my job to think about long historical arcs. And if I think about where we're going to be 20 years from now, 10 years from now, even 5 years from now, I don't feel great about it.
Great.
And again, like I don't know that there's going to be a huge explosion of plague, but I would like the disease to not be interrupting people's lives. I would like county public health departments not to be saddled with everything the federal government is choosing not to do. They don't get paid enough. They're going to be overworked. Things are going to slip through the cracks, and it's going to impact local people. They're going to get hurt. And I don't want to see that. And I think that's true with mosquitoes and fleas and the animals that fleas get plague from.
All right. That's a great place to stop. I want to invite you back when these come to fruition.
Like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry this happened. Did you clear out your woodpile?
Ooh. I'll update folks on.
Okay.
Bethany, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much to Bethany for coming on the show. After our discussion, I did tell my dad about the plague in rats. He does still have that wood pile and says those cats have helped out there, even though I'm not fully convinced. He's talked about getting some kind of flea protection from the cats, and I'll play this episode for him the next time we're in the car together and hopefully move him from contemplation to action. I'll return with updates. Next week, I'm excited to bring you another multi-part episode with the woman who claims to cure autism via behavior changes. I'll share in advance that she said she'd be willing to answer any listener questions on a future episode, so have those pens and paper ready. This has been Jessica Wilson. This has been an episode of Making It Awkward. You can rate, review, subscribe to the show, share it with a friend. It's edited by Jen Jacobs, who lives on the East Coast and is less anxious about getting the plague than I am. You can email the show at makingitawkwardpod@gmail.com. This is a production of The Body Politic, and it's supported by the Legacy of Sacramento Outward Services.